Breaking news in the Lilly and Jack Sullivan case that has captivated the nation and left investigators searching for answers for nearly 10 months. New information has emerged that suggests this case may finally be approaching resolution as we enter 2026. After months of silence from key individuals, people who were present in the home the day the children disappeared are now coming forward with shocking claims that contradict the official narrative. These aren't distant observers or internet theorists. These are people who were there, who saw what happened in the hours before 6-year-old Lily and 4-year-old Jack vanished from their rural Nova Scotia home on May 2, 2025. What they're revealing raises disturbing questions about whether these children simply wandered into the woods as initially believed, or whether something far more sinister occurred. The stepfather Daniel Martell has broken his silence after months of public scrutiny, making explosive allegations about the children's mother, Malehya Brooks-Murray. Close friends and relatives are coming forward with accounts that paint a completely different picture than what was presented to police. And most troubling of all, new theories suggest the children may still be alive but hidden, protected by people who believe they're doing the right thing or covering up something terrible that happened that day. Before we dive into these shocking new developments and examine what they mean for this case, you absolutely need to subscribe to True Crime Vault right now and hit that notification bell. This is a developing story with new information emerging constantly. We've been following this case since day one with comprehensive coverage you won't find anywhere else. If you want to stay informed as this investigation unfolds and potentially reaches its conclusion, subscribe immediately. Hit that like button because it helps push this critical content to more people demanding answers for Lily and Jack. Drop your thoughts in the comments as we go through these revelations. Do you think the children are still alive? Do you believe they're being hidden by family members? Let's discuss this together as a community refusing to let this case fade into obscurity. The disappearance of Lily and Jack Sullivan on May 2, 2025 seemed straightforward at first. 2 young children playing in their fenced backyard in Lansdowne Station, a tiny rural community in Pictou County, Nova Scotia. Their mother, Malehya, and stepfather Daniel inside the house with baby sister Meadow, Daniel's mother Janie, in a trailer behind the property. A normal spring morning, until suddenly it wasn't. At approximately 8:59 a.m., Janie reported hearing the children laughing and playing on the swing set. 40 minutes later, they were gone. No screams, no struggle, just silence. When Malehya realized the children weren't in the house and couldn't be seen in the yard, she called 911 at 9:41 a.m. That rapid response, just 1 minute after discovering they were missing, would later raise questions. Was it natural maternal panic or something else? The initial search operation was massive and mobilized with incredible speed. Over 100 volunteers responded within hours, driven by the desperate hope that 2 small children had simply wandered off and could be quickly located. Police officers from multiple Royal Canadian Mounted Police detachments converged on the area. Search and rescue teams assembled with professional equipment and years of experience finding lost people in wilderness. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras flew systematic grid patterns over the dense forest. Drones covered areas that were difficult to access on foot. Cadaver dogs, trained specifically to detect human remains, worked the terrain methodically. All of this deployment happened with remarkable efficiency, demonstrating that when children go missing in Canada, the response is immediate and comprehensive. The terrain they were searching was absolutely brutal and unforgiving. Dense woods where visibility drops to mere meters once you step off a trail. Fallen timber creating obstacle courses that require constant climbing over or crawling under massive logs. Steep embankments where one wrong step could send someone tumbling down rocky slopes. Cold temperatures that even in May still hovered around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough to cause hypothermia in children within hours. Muddy conditions from spring snowmelt that made every surface slippery and treacherous. This wasn't gentle forest where children could wander safely. This was dangerous wilderness that posed serious risks even to experienced adult searchers. The fact that 2 young children, ages 4 and 6, could have navigated this terrain seemed increasingly unlikely the more searchers examined it firsthand. Despite this overwhelming effort that eventually covered over 12,000 hours of search time, they found almost nothing of significance. A piece of pink blanket matching one that belonged to Lily was discovered along a pipeline trail about 1 kilometer from the house. This pipeline trail is essentially a cleared corridor through the forest where infrastructure was installed, creating a relatively open path that would be easier for children to walk along than dense bush. The blanket fragment was initially uncertain, requiring comparison with items from the home to confirm it was Lily's. Once confirmed, it became a crucial piece of evidence showing the children had been at least that far from home. But the question remained whether they walked there themselves or whether the blanket was transported there by other means. Child-sized boot prints were found in muddy ground along the same pipeline trail. Two different sets of prints, suggesting two children had walked through that area. One of the prints had distinctive tread markings that appeared consistent with Lily's boots, which were UK size 29, equivalent to Canadian size 11. The tread pattern seemed to match, though police never issued a public statement confirming definitively that these were Lily and Jack's prints. Investigators tend to be cautious about such confirmations because being wrong about a key piece of evidence early in a case can derail an entire investigation. The prints were carefully documented with photographs, measurements, and casts made for comparison purposes. But whether these prints proved the children walked that far under their own power, or whether someone carried them part of the way and they only walked briefly, remains unknown. But despite these few items, there were no bodies discovered. No additional clothing was found. No other personal belongings that could be definitively linked to Lily and Jack. No signs of a struggle or violence. No blood evidence. Nothing to definitively explain what happened to these children after they left their yard that morning. For an investigation that deployed such massive resources and covered such extensive ground so thoroughly, the absence of findings was itself deeply troubling. Children don't simply vanish without leaving some trace, especially children as young as 4 and 6 who would have limited ability to cover long distances through difficult terrain. One of the most important pieces of evidence that has largely been overlooked in public discussion is what the scent tracking dogs revealed during the initial search. Multiple sources close to the investigation have stated that when professional tracking dogs, animals specifically trained to follow human scent over long distances, were brought to the property to track Lily and Jack, something significant happened. The dogs picked up the children's scent, likely from clothing or belongings provided from the house. They followed that scent from the backyard area toward the front of the property, and then, at the end of the driveway where it meets the road, the dogs stopped tracking completely. They didn't continue into the woods on either side of the road. They didn't follow a trail along the road in either direction. They stopped at the exact point where a vehicle would typically pull up to pick someone up or drop them off. This single detail has profound implications that cannot be overstated. When scent-tracking dogs lose a trail abruptly at a specific location, it typically means one of two things. Either the scent was destroyed by something like heavy rain washing it away, which didn't occur that morning, or the person being tracked got into a vehicle at that point. If the scent trail ended at the driveway, it very strongly suggests the children didn't wander off on foot into wilderness on their own. It suggests they got into a vehicle, either a vehicle they knew and entered willingly, or a vehicle they were placed into by someone else. This completely changes the nature of what might have happened. It transforms the case from children lost in woods to children who left the property in a vehicle. The critical questions become whose vehicle was it, who was driving it, and did the children go willingly or were they taken? For months after the disappearance, the key figures in this case remained largely silent, creating a vacuum of information that was filled by speculation and rumor. Malehya Brooks-Murray, the children's mother and the last adult to see them before they disappeared, stopped participating in search efforts within just a few days. According to multiple accounts, there was some kind of confrontation or incident at the search command post that led to her withdrawing from public view entirely. She left the Lansdowne Station area, reportedly going to stay with family members in another part of Nova Scotia. She ceased all public communication, giving no interviews, making no public statements, not appearing in any media coverage. For a mother whose children had just vanished, this absence from the public search effort was conspicuous and generated immediate suspicion from many observers. Daniel Martell, the children's stepfather who had been living in the home with Malehya and all the children, gave a few early interviews to media in the first days after the disappearance. He appeared on camera looking devastated, speaking about the children with apparent emotion, calling for anyone with information to come forward. But as online discussions about the case intensified and accusations against him began proliferating on social media platforms, He too went quiet. The scrutiny had become overwhelming, with true crime enthusiasts analyzing his every word, his facial expressions, his body language, looking for signs of deception or guilt. Death threats started arriving. Drones flew over the property constantly, filming for YouTube channels. People drove slowly past the house recording video. Under that pressure, Daniel withdrew from public view for several months. The biological father, Cody Sullivan, and his mother, Belinda, were interviewed extensively by police in the investigation's early weeks. They were brought in for formal questioning, asked detailed questions about their relationship with the children and with Malehya, their whereabouts on May 2nd, and whether they had any knowledge of what might have happened. After thorough investigation, including review of their phone records, financial records, and alibis, they were told by RCMP that they were no longer considered suspects, but they had very limited information to offer because they hadn't actually seen Lilly and Jack in nearly 3 years. The custody situation after Malehya and Cody's separation had resulted in Cody essentially losing contact with his children. While Belinda had initially maintained some relationship with the kids through Malehya's cooperation, even that had stopped about 18 months before the disappearance. So while they desperately wanted to help find their grandchildren, they had no recent knowledge of the household dynamics or what might have led to the children going missing. The silence from those closest to Lilly and Jack was deafening and increasingly frustrating to a public that was desperately seeking answers and unable to understand why the people who should have the most information were saying the least. In most missing children cases, parents are constantly in front of cameras, doing interviews, making tearful pleas, showing photos, doing anything possible to keep public attention focused on finding their kids. The absence of that normal parental behavior from Malehya in particular generated enormous suspicion. If she had nothing to hide, people asked, why wouldn't she be doing everything possible publicly to find her children? Then in mid-June 2025, more than 6 weeks after the children disappeared, that wall of silence began to crack. During a live stream discussion about the case hosted by a content creator who had been covering it extensively, something completely unexpected happened. A name appeared in the chat section. Daniel Martell. Not on camera, not in a scheduled interview, not in any official capacity. Just a username in the live chat, typing messages. At first, many viewers thought it had to be a fake account, someone pretending to be Daniel to troll the discussion or stir up drama. But the host of the stream clicked on the account to check the profile. It was Daniel's actual YouTube account, created way back in 2012, with a few old Pokemon videos uploaded years ago. There was no doubt this was actually him, and he started making claims that would fundamentally shift how many people viewed the entire case. Daniel's messages in that live stream chat were marked by visible rage, desperation, and what seemed like genuine fear for his youngest daughter, Meadow. His typing was urgent, his messages sometimes coming in rapid-fire succession as he tried to convey everything he wanted to say. He described feeling completely helpless and frustrated by what he characterized as a system that was protecting the wrong people and punishing him for cooperating. His main stated motivation for breaking his silence at that moment was his increasing fear for Meadow, the 1-year-old baby who was his and Malehya's biological daughter together. Daniel stated that Malehya had broken Child Protective Services protocols by disappearing with Meadow, without maintaining the required 24/7 supervision that had been mandated. When children are involved in a situation like missing siblings and authorities have concerns, CPS often imposes conditions on parents who retain custody of other children. One common condition is requiring that someone else, a relative or approved person, be present at all times to supervise the parent's care of the remaining children. According to Daniel, this condition had been placed on Malehya, but she had violated it by taking Meadow and leaving without that required supervision. He believed this violation meant Meadow was now at serious risk of being removed from Malehya's custody by Child Protective Services. But Daniel's concerns seemed to go beyond just bureaucratic protocols. He expressed genuine alarm that Meadow might be in danger. Not necessarily physical danger, but danger of being caught up in whatever had happened to her older siblings. He described Meadow as everything to him, spoke about how important she was, and made clear that losing access to her while she remained with Malehya, who had allegedly broken protocols, was unbearable to him. This wasn't just abstract legal discussion. This was a father talking about his baby daughter and his terror that he was powerless to protect her. Then Daniel made the allegations that would dominate discussion of the case for weeks afterward. He stated directly that he believed Malehya's family knew where Lilly and Jack were. Not that they suspected something or had theories, but that they actually knew. He claimed the children had been hidden, deliberately removed from the home and taken somewhere, and that family members on Malehya's side were actively concealing their location. He suggested Malehya had put the children in a vehicle and orchestrated their disappearance with help from relatives. He even went so far as to claim he knew which specific vehicle had been used and who had driven it, though he didn't provide those details publicly, either because he was holding back for legal reasons or because his knowledge was based on suspicion rather than proof. Daniel's messages painted Malehya as someone who was being controlled by her mother Cindy, someone who couldn't face Daniel directly because his presence would cause her to break down and reveal the truth. He described how on the morning of May the 2nd, before everything fell apart, Malehya had told a police officer directly that she felt safest when she was with Daniel. That statement, made to law enforcement, suggested she trusted him and felt protected by his presence. But according to Daniel, everything changed abruptly within hours of her mother Cindy arriving on the scene. Suddenly Malehya left, blocked Daniel on all social media platforms and phone, cut all communication completely, and vanished with baby Meadow. Daniel believes this dramatic 180 wasn't an organic decision by Malehya, but rather the result of Cindy arriving and taking control of the situation. In his view, Cindy is a domineering figure who exerts enormous influence over her daughter, enough to make her abandon the person she said she felt safest with, and enough to make her participate in hiding whatever truth exists about what happened to Lilly and Jack. Whether this characterization of Cindy is accurate or whether it's Daniel's attempt to shift blame away from himself and Malehya onto a third party who isn't present to defend herself is impossible to know without hearing other perspectives. One of the most disturbing and specific details Daniel revealed in his chat messages was about Malehya's final visit to their shared home after the children had disappeared. Apparently, at some point in the days following May 2nd, Malehya returned to the house briefly. Daniel wasn't there at the time, or if he was, they didn't interact, but he noticed what she had taken. She didn't gather her clothes, her toiletries, her personal belongings, any of the normal things someone would collect if they were leaving a home permanently. She didn't take furniture or meaningful possessions or anything that would make sense if she was simply moving out to live elsewhere. She came back specifically for 3 items: the children's birth certificates, school photos of Lilly and Jack, and 2 small stuffed animals that belonged to the children, comfort items they had loved. That's it. Those 3 categories of items. Daniel views this as devastating proof of her knowledge and intentions. Why would someone whose children had just vanished into wilderness grab those children's birth certificates? Birth certificates are needed for travel, for enrolling in school in a new location, for proving identity. Why would someone take school photos unless they wanted recent images of what the children looked like? And why would someone take the children's beloved stuffed animals unless they planned to bring those items to the children wherever they were? For Daniel, this pattern of items taken is the clearest possible evidence that Malehya knows where Lilly and Jack are and planned to either take them those belongings or needed their documentation for some purpose related to keeping them hidden. It's the kind of detail that seems insignificant on the surface but carries enormous weight when you think through the implications. If Malehya genuinely believed her children had wandered into woods and were lost or dead, why would she prioritize grabbing their birth certificates? It doesn't make sense unless she knew they were alive and would need those documents. Daniel also made extremely serious allegations about possible evidence planting against him. He claimed that 2 of his sweaters, items of clothing that belonged to him, had been taken from the home. He didn't witness who took them and doesn't have direct proof of what happened to them, but he believes the intent was to plant those items somewhere as evidence to frame him for involvement in the children's disappearance. This is a major accusation suggesting not just a cover-up, but active attempts to manufacture evidence against an innocent person. Whether this claim has any merit or whether it's paranoia, born from months of accusations and stress, is unclear. But it demonstrates the complete breakdown of trust between Daniel and Malehya's family, and his belief that they're not just hiding information, but actively working to destroy him. Throughout his chat messages, Daniel emphasized repeatedly that he had cooperated fully with police from the very beginning. He volunteered for a polygraph examination without being asked, wanting to clear his name and prove he had nothing to hide. He handed over his cell phone. giving investigators complete access to his communications, his location data, everything. He provided access to his Google location history, his bank records, his social media accounts. He held nothing back. And according to him, that full cooperation should count for something. But instead, he's been treated as a suspect, while Malehya, who fled and stopped cooperating, has been protected. Following Daniel's explosive appearance in that live stream chat, he gave a more formal interview where he expanded on these claims and provided additional context and details. He wanted to tell his full story, to lay out everything he knew and everything he believed, to counter the narrative that had been building against him online. In this interview, his tone was calmer than in the chat messages, but still heavy with emotion and frustration. He emphasized from the start that he knows the truth of what happened to him personally. He stated clearly, "I didn't kill Lilly and Jack." That direct statement was important to him, putting it on record explicitly rather than relying on denials of involvement that could be ambiguous. Daniel provided details about the polygraph examination that he found both reassuring and troubling. The polygraph examiner, he said, told him afterward that he had done a good job and had passed the test. That should have been the end of it, proof of his innocence, clearance to move forward. But what troubled Daniel deeply was the specific nature of the questions he had been asked. The examiner didn't ask whether he had taken the children, didn't ask if he knew where they were, didn't ask if he had helped hide them. The questions were all focused on death. Did you kill Lilly and Jack? Do you know who killed them? Are they dead? This distinction is critically important because it reveals what investigators were actually suspecting at that point in the investigation. They weren't asking about abduction scenarios or family members hiding children. They were asking about death. They were trying to determine if Daniel had caused the children to die or had knowledge of their deaths. To Daniel, this felt like the investigation had already made up its mind that Lilly and Jack were dead. Even though no bodies had been found and no evidence of death had been presented publicly, he seemed genuinely frustrated that the possibility that children were still alive wasn't being taken seriously by authorities. Daniel also revealed that according to what he'd been told, 7 people total had been given polygraph examinations in connection with this case. He didn't name all 7, but indicated that this included him, presumably Malehya, possibly Janie, and other individuals close to the family. He stated that as far as he knew, no deception had been indicated in any of these examinations. Everyone who was tested passed. If this information is accurate, it's extremely significant. It would mean that everyone examined, when asked questions about the children's disappearance and possible death, showed no physiological signs of deception. But polygraph tests, while useful investigative tools, have significant limitations that are important to understand. First, they're not admissible as evidence in Canadian courts. A judge cannot consider polygraph results when determining guilt or innocence, and they can't be presented to a jury. They're used purely as investigative tools to help police focus their resources and assess witness credibility, not as proof of anything. Second, polygraphs can be beaten by people who are skilled at controlling their physiological responses, who practice breathing and muscle tension techniques, or who have certain psychological conditions that prevent the normal stress responses the test measures. Third, and perhaps most importantly, polygraph results depend entirely on what questions are asked. If the questions are overly specific and someone answers truthfully to those specific questions while lying about related matters, they can pass. If someone genuinely believes their own false narrative because they've convinced themselves of a different version of reality, they might show no deception even while saying things that aren't objectively true. Daniel also revealed information about surveillance footage that he claims establishes a crucial timeline for the case. He stated that video from Highland Square Mall, a shopping center in the area, shows him, Malehya, Baby Meadow, Lilly, and Jack all together shopping on May 1st, the day before the children were reported missing. According to Daniel, this footage clearly shows all 5 family members, proves the older children were alive and with both parents less than 24 hours before they disappeared, and was turned over to RCMP as evidence. He even said a co-worker saw them at the mall and corroborated that they were all there together. If this surveillance footage exists and shows what Daniel claims, it would be extremely important evidence. It would definitively establish that Lilly and Jack were alive on May 1st. It would show the family dynamic, how the children were behaving, whether they seemed distressed or normal. It would create a clear timeline that investigators could work backward from. But this footage has never been released publicly. Police haven't confirmed its existence or what it shows. There's been no official statement about whether it even exists or whether Daniel's claims about it are accurate. And that silence around such potentially crucial evidence has fueled tremendous speculation about what authorities know but aren't revealing to the public. Then other voices began joining Daniel's in breaking the silence that had surrounded this case. Logan, who describes himself as either a close relative or deeply trusted friend of Daniel, came forward with his own account of what he witnessed and what he believes happened. Logan positions himself as someone who was present at the scene from the very beginning, standing beside Daniel through the initial chaos of that first day when search operations were launching and everyone was trying to understand what had happened. He speaks with the authority of someone who was there, who saw the dynamics firsthand, who witnessed conversations and behaviors that outsiders didn't see. Logan strongly corroborated Daniel's version of events, particularly the claim about what Malehya said to police on that first day. According to Logan, he personally heard Malehya tell Officer Mason, a specific RCMP officer who was on scene early, that she felt safest when she was with Daniel. Those weren't words relayed secondhand or remembered vaguely. Logan says he heard this direct statement from Malehya to law enforcement. That makes her subsequent behavior, leaving Daniel completely and cutting all contact within hours of making that statement, even more inexplicable and suspicious. If someone tells police they feel safest with a particular person, why would they then flee from that person and refuse all communication? Logan went further than just confirming facts. He offered his interpretation of what caused this dramatic shift. He believes that everything changed when Cindy, Malehya's mother, arrived on the scene. In Logan's view, Cindy has an almost frightening level of control over her daughter, enough that her arrival alone was sufficient to completely change Malehya's behavior and decisions. He characterized it as Malehya becoming a different person once her mother showed up. Where she had been cooperative and present before, she became withdrawn and resistant after. Where she had expressed trust in Daniel, she suddenly cut him off entirely. Logan suggests this wasn't natural evolution of thought or feeling, but rather the result of Cindy's influence, possibly manipulation, possibly direct instruction. Logan made dark insinuations about possible outside interference that allowed or enabled Malehya to leave so suddenly and to remain protected from scrutiny afterward. He referenced the idea that someone made a call, pulled strings, arranged protection. He suggests there might be legal or jurisdictional or familial factors at play that have kept Malehya insulated from the kind of pressure and investigation that Daniel has faced. Whether he's talking about involvement of Child Protective Services treating her differently, or legal representation that's particularly effective, or family resources that provided shelter and protection, he believes Malehya has been shielded in ways that Daniel hasn't been. He characterized it as boom. She was gone, protected, as if mechanisms were already in place to extract her from the situation when needed. One of Logan's strongest points of frustration centers on the Child Protective Services response and how differently the two parents have been treated. Daniel, who stayed, who cooperated fully with investigators, who submitted to polygraphs and turned over all his devices and records, who made himself available for questioning whenever asked, was nevertheless stripped of his right to see his infant daughter Meadow. CPS removed Meadow from his access, preventing him from seeing or having contact with his own biological child, despite the fact that he's never been charged with any crime, despite the fact that he passed a polygraph examination, despite the fact that he's done everything authorities have asked. Meanwhile, Malehya, who fled the scene, who stopped cooperating with the investigation, who took Meadow and disappeared, apparently maintained custody or at least access to the child for significant periods. To Logan, this represents a fundamentally broken system that punishes cooperation and rewards evasion. He sees it as the system protecting the wrong person, supporting someone who's hiding while abandoning someone who's trying to help. Logan also talked about the intense external pressure and harassment that he and Daniel have faced since becoming public figures in this case. They've received death threats, not vague online trolling, but specific threats serious enough that police were notified. They've been targeted by online communities convinced of their guilt, with people creating elaborate theories about their involvement, posting their addresses and information, encouraging others to harass them. The stress of living under that kind of constant hostility, while also dealing with the trauma of two children being missing, has been enormous. And Logan's point is that they're enduring all of this while doing the very thing that people should want them to do, which is speaking publicly, cooperating with authorities, trying to help find the truth. Meanwhile, the people who have gone silent and refuse to cooperate face no similar pressure because they've made themselves unavailable for it. Most significantly, Logan made references that many people initially missed or didn't understand the significance of. He spoke carefully about a back entrance, a hallway, and the possibility that a vehicle came to the property that morning. He was vague, probably deliberately so for legal reasons or because he doesn't have definitive proof, but he implied there could have been a way for someone to arrive at the property, for the children to be transferred into a vehicle without the kind of commotion or visibility one would expect if children were simply wandering off into the woods on their own. He suggested it could have been planned, coordinated, quiet. Subscribe to True Crime Vault. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Justice for Lilly and Jack Sullivan. Thank you for watching.